Her father-in-law killed her. Respectfully.
Thank you for being respectful about it.
Jeannie, I think Sean picked this comment just because you said respectfully, and oftentimes these comments are not always respectful. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Miles Reef. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. Guys, it's Monday. You know what time it is? It's time to get into some comment reactions. I know that we missed a couple of weeks. As all of our loyal viewers and listeners know, I've actually been in London for a couple of months, and we did manage to keep the train moving, but it slipped off a little bit. We missed a couple of comment reacts, and our apologies for that, because this is kind of like where we get to go back and forth with our real core audience, and we enjoy this immensely. So big apologies, but we're back on track, and we're getting into it with you guys. So Sean, before we start, do we have any channel business we should touch on?
I think that's the big one. It's just, it's easy to shoot other stuff ahead of time and get it turned around and like make sure that those big Friday case breakdowns and interviews don't fall off. But man, the comment reacts, we like to keep it fresh. It's like sushi, you have to have this like fresh off the boat or you really don't want to eat it. No one wants to react to a comment from 6 months ago. So thank you guys for bearing with us. Other than that, I think I'm just excited to hear what you guys had to say over the last couple of weeks. So Miles, why don't we dive in?
All right, let's do it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to touch on some Leanne Beck comments. Now, obviously, guys, that case kept us busy for the better part of a month, between our case breakdown and all the interviews with Leanne's friends. And I have to say that case is a little bit off the beaten path for us. It's not really an unsolved case, so to speak. To me, it's an unprosecuted case, which I think the paperwork says. Basically, if you go back and you look at the investigative officer's recommendations, they recommended prosecution, and the prosecutors said that they were unlikely to get a conviction. So having said that lengthy caveat, I'm going to read a comment about Leanne Beck's case. So Tammy Jackson 8919 says, "Why do I feel like he hit her with his vehicle?" And then Tammy Jackson says, right on her own comment, "He told on himself. She fell out of the vehicle, probably trying to get away." Christy Valenti, who is one of the young women that we interviewed, who is a friend of Leanne's, actually is here in the comments. And she says there was spidering on the inside of the windshield. They were driving that night. The police report states there was organic matter in that spidering. Now, Christy, you're absolutely right. That's a detail that we didn't touch on in our case breakdown, and I don't think that came up in our interviews with you guys, but that is in the police reports, which we do have copies of. As Jason said to the police in one of his later interviews, because as we know, he did multiple interviews with the police and kept kind of like giving more information out or changing information as he went along. He did say that she jumped out of the car, and that, thus explaining the sort of road burns on her. So I don't know that that's where the blunt force trauma to her head came from, but it certainly does explain some of the injuries that were on poor Leanne's body.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've seen pictures of this vehicle. We can put another one up. I think we put it up last week too. This passenger window definitely looks like, someone had their head cracked off of it or something similar. And the fact that the police are saying that they found organic matter in that, well, how many things that organically are you going to smack into that window? Are they talking about a grapefruit? Probably not, right? There was human beings riding in that car, and she had a severe head wound. So it's not a big leap to think Leanne was in that car with no head wound and no damage to the window. And then later that night, both her and the car are damaged. Something probably happened there. It's kind of a tricky one to talk about because there's so much stuff on the table here that it seems like the pieces are rather easy to put together. But of course, no charges have ever been filed here. So you have to kind of like take everything with a grain of salt and remember that. I do think, Tammy,
well, I think we have to be careful because no one has been sort of charged or convicted in this case. And we've got to always remember that, when we're presenting something like this.
Exactly, which to be honest has made it a trickier one to do than some of our other episodes where there really is, not even a suspect. We're talking about cases where people have no clue what happened. Here, it's a couple of people and some events that feel like we don't have every answer available to us, or maybe there's enough information there that people are wanting more of an investigation and more done about it. Now, Tammy, I do want to say, I think you're probably onto the right track. It's hard to explain how Leanne would have gotten the injuries that she had without something like what you're describing happening. The first night when Jason was talking to the first responders, he said the only thing he could think of is that they had some rough sex. But then we're looking at a woman with a severe head wound, road rash all over her body. Maybe being in a car, hitting your head off of a window and then falling out of a moving vehicle sounds a little more likely to cause wounds like that than rough sex. Although, again, what happens behind closed doors, who knows? That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd like to say, maybe we should have mentioned this up top, because of the touchiness of Leanne's case and some of the ins and outs of sort of the legality of it, and also the graphicness of some of the material that we put into the cut, we did have some trouble with YouTube on those videos, and it's you guys will see, like those of you who have watched it, like the views aren't as high as we usually get. And I think that's because it is a legally touchy case and it's not, there's people named in it. Right. So, it's just something to keep in mind. It's an interesting experience being on YouTube, because it's a very free platform. It's really great to have like sort of total control over what you're doing, but you also realize that you are being sort of censored, or maybe censored is the wrong word. That's a strong word, but there's guardrails up that we're still learning sometimes, right? I mean, Sean and I have been at this for still less than a year that we've had this channel up, and sometimes we take a big swing and we want to sort of platform a story and we want to help people, and we learn a lesson about how we can do that better maybe next time something like this comes along, and maybe not using all the graphic material or being a little different in how we word things. But hey, live and learn, no regrets. We love all the women who came forward. We're super happy to be able to support them and to platform Leanne's story. We just wish that it had reached more people, because usually we do, and that's kind of what happened with that.
Well, look, it was a tricky one because the crux of the issue is seeing what happened to Leanne is so important, and seeing kind of like some imagery of what the scene looked like, we felt was really important, and the friends did too. That's why we were provided with so much material for that case. But the trade-off that we are learning is YouTube can be very sensitive about, crime scene footage and photos of injuries, even if they're blurred and very obscured, which we did. It does not like that stuff. And so it was tough to tell that story, because verbally it's really hard to sell just how over the top Leanne's injuries were, and the scene not adding up to the story. Like, you can see it on camera, and we wanted you guys to see it on camera, but the trade-off is maybe it was a little too hot for TV compared to the normal stuff that we do. So yeah, like Miles said, no regrets. I think supporting everybody that loves Leanne was the most important thing here.
Yeah, ultimately that's why we're here. We just wish that it had reached more of you guys. Again, on Leanne Beck's case, Amber Tinney, 5932. Hi, Amber. Thanks for the comment. Yeah, his family must know someone in the court or county attorney's office or something, because for something like this to not get prosecuted screams that it got pushed aside because of who they know. Obviously, I think we know who Amber's referring to here. Here's what I'd say about that. And Sean, I'd love to know what you think. I have seen other cases in my career where prosecutors have declined to move forward because they just didn't think that they would be able to get a conviction. And that sometimes they want to hold on to the possibility of doing it. You know what I mean? And they don't want to go to a jury trial, lose, and then that's it, and they're never able to try the case. So I do know that that happens. I've seen it happen, and I've seen some of those cases eventually come to trial when they get that crucial piece of evidence that they've been looking for, or whatever it is. I think there's stuff around Leanne's relationship that maybe could be manipulated by a defense attorney, and depending on who's sitting on a jury, you never know how people are going to react to certain facts, to certain things being revealed. Listen, just the fact that they were already in divorce proceedings and she had an order of protection out, but she was willingly in a bar drinking heavily, by all accounts, by eyewitnesses and on video, that in and of itself could be, manipulated by a good defense attorney. And, from what we understand, certain people have money and, they could probably afford a good defense. So I don't know. There's a lot of talk always in cases like this about, who do they know? And it's a conspiracy and, it's rotten. And that's possible. I'm not saying that's not true. And I'm not saying that, a family can't have influence. I'm also just saying that I understand how the system works. And sometimes prosecutors, their job is to get convictions. And if they don't think they're going to get one, they're not necessarily going to want to spend the thousands and thousands of dollars that it costs to go to a jury trial and use the taxpayers' money if they're convinced that they're not going to be able to succeed. But Sean, what do you think?
No, you're right on. I think, we got a lot of information from people, both really closely connected to Leanne, but also just folks commenting who knew either Jason from back in the day or Leanne or was familiar with them. And a lot of people said, look, this is a guy whose family has money. They're connected in the area. Somebody even commented, I go to a bar where he goes pretty frequently, and he's there a lot of times with friends who I know are cops. And so I think the implication everyone was making is that, like this commenter is saying, maybe because of the connections and the resources, that's why we're not seeing this. And I would say, remember that the police actually referred homicide charges in this. It was not the police that protected Jason. They are the ones who investigated and said they believed at the least negligent homicide, which is the actual charge they referred, was appropriate. It was the prosecutors who declined it. And I haven't seen anything about him being at a bar with them, just to be frank. Right. But it doesn't mean that that's impossible.
But Amber does say court or county attorney's office, just, in defense of Amber's comment.
Right.
He doesn't say, he must know the cops.
Yeah, Amber, I'm sorry. I'm kind of answering some other people.
Yeah, I'm just
my response to you.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I think that, we leaned away from discussing that in our coverage of this case because it really is. And not to say that some of these facts aren't true. Maybe his family has money. Maybe he is friends with, local officials. But that's sort of hearsay, and there's no provable evidence that has anything to do with the way that this whole thing turned out. I think it certainly looks a particular way to people in the area familiar with all of these people, and I appreciate that. And I know Miles appreciates that too. Like, we hear you, we get it. But then for us to turn around and present that is a sort of a different story. So that's not something that we decided to really make much of a meal of. I think the facts of what happened that night versus the facts of what Jason said happened that night and what we actually see on the video and the facts about Leanne's body, that was more what we wanted to examine, because I think those are the real reasons people are wondering, how come the police and the investigators wanted homicide charges and it wasn't enough for the prosecutors to take it? Like, that's where the disconnect is, because clearly a lot of people who know this story are like wondering why it turned out that way. And it may be that there's a really good reason and we just haven't heard it.
And that reason could go beyond what I laid out, that, the prosecutors just felt that there was enough there within the history of their relationship that if they went to trial, it would be a losing proposition with the jury, but that's also, I think, possible. I look, everyone's just a person. Sometimes people make the wrong decisions. Nobody's infallible. If you learn anything working with people in power, people in positions of authority, what you find out is that they're just folks just like us who are put in really, really high-powered, stressful jobs, and they're trying to navigate it. Sometimes right decisions are made, sometimes wrong decisions are made. They're not like all knowing and all powerful. So, that is my rant. That's what I got for that. Um, you want to
Why
take
don't
this
it?
next one?
Yeah, I'll take this next one. This is from Christina 4018. Hi, Christina. So she says reactive abuse is what these ladies are describing. We're talking about Leanne Beck still. Classic domestic abuse tactic, and shocking that law enforcement didn't get that and ended up charging her. Okay, so what Christina's talking about is these incidents that Leanne's friends told us of where her and Jason would be having an argument. It would get really heated, and he would be doing something to really anger her or maybe even physically abusing her. And then what would happen is he would turn a camera on, or as they said, sometimes even his mother, who was around, would turn a camera on to catch Leanne's reaction to it, which was to fight back, to be upset, to maybe get violent herself. And I think what Christine is saying is that this is a known tactic, right? When you push somebody's buttons enough to get them to explode, even though they weren't the antagonist to begin with, and then you either film that or sort of gaslight them into thinking that they're the one that's crazy, even though you just spent an hour trying to get a rise out of them, that is a special kind of abuse, reactive abuse. I actually had to look this up. I've never heard of it. I think most of us have probably experienced some version of it if you've been in a relationship long enough, so you know what it feels like when someone's needling you and trying to get a rise out of you, and then you blow up, and maybe you feel like you're the crazy one because you lost your temper first. But it sounds like, boiling it all down, like Leanne and Jason's relationship was pretty fraught. I mean, the fact that it ended in divorce and restraining orders and a death that a lot of people are suspicious of tells you all you need to know about that situation. But really what her friends wanted to do in talking to us was stick up for her side of events, because there are documented cases where she was the one that got in trouble when the cops came, and they were showing videos of her acting inappropriately. And as usual, there are many sides to these stories, and relationships are extremely complicated things, right, Miles? I mean,
Yeah, and also I just want to say I I also had to look up what reactive abuse is, and I appreciate that, and I love learning new things. I don't know that for the police that matters. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
once someone steps over a certain line, in a physical sense, it doesn't matter if they were provoked into that. Do you know what I'm saying? That's still the person that's committing assault. So, cops, you know, have like parameters that they have to work within, and they're very black and white, and that's the law. And that's why they serve a certain purpose in our society, right? Like they're not shrinks, like, and there's this whole argument, all right, there's like a debate in the public sphere of like who should be going to certain calls, and
well, it's also why court exists, right? Like they're there to just settle the situation quickly, collect the
right.
evidence, and if someone needs to be charged, that person goes to court and has it figured out. It's right. It's not up to the cop to be like the judge, jury, and executioner every time they show up to a house where there's an incident.
Right, but if the cop shows up and both people have, physically assaulted each other, they're under obligation to arrest both of those people. And
Exactly. Exactly.
it's they, like I said, they're not doing an analysis of it and saying, well, hey, that's reactive abuse. But I look, Christina, thank you, because it's, as I said, I love learning, and it was very interesting to find out that that's a thing. And I think we all have experienced it on some level within some relationship that we've been in.
Yeah.
So yeah, and not necessarily physical. I'm not saying that, but you can be pushed in other ways, right?
Absolutely. I mean, arguments often develop down that line anyway, where people, try to say something nasty and then pretend like they didn't, and harp on the person who's reacting to the nasty comment. It's complicated stuff, guys. But I appreciate you shedding some context on the situation, because I think that's what you were probably really trying to do. Uh,
Absolutely.
let's move to a sort of a surprise case that had a little bit of a renaissance on our channel over the past 2 weeks. Missy Beavers. We started getting a lot of comments on that. I don't know why, but back in the zeitgeist. So, Miles, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Joshua I7Z2V. Hi, Joshua. Thanks for the comment. Says, tactical gear gave the killer a physical advantage over Missy, not because of a disguise. This person could have easily worn a hoodie and jeans and a mask. Killer knew Missy could fight back and didn't want that.
Hmm.
That's interesting. I'm processing this because Sean and I tend to do these spontaneously. Like, one of us will collect the comments and then we'll kind of read them. And full disclosure, Sean collected these, and this is the first time I'm seeing these
Yeah.
in one place.
I
Uh,
can leap in if you want to think about it for a
I'm
second.
thinking about it. I just don't know. Like, it feels to me like a burden. I mean, it's like ill-fitting clothes and boots and a vest that stops ballistics. I don't know. Like, I almost said she. The killer, the suspect in the footage. We could show them. Um, they weren't wearing like like hockey armor. That would help them pummel someone, or like spiked armbands, or I don't know. I'm not articulating this very well, Sean. Maybe you want to jump in, but
Well,
I
there's
think we're on the same page. I'm reading your face.
Yeah, I mean they're saying something in this comment that I've said many times, which is that if this was a burglar, they could have worn a hoodie and a jeans and a mask. But the and I agree with that. I mean, like the idea that you would go in there to steal stuff dressed in this ridiculous outfit has something I've always butted up against this fact since day one, even though some of our viewers think I'm wrong and like have argued very strongly that there's a completely legitimate reason someone would dress as a riot police officer to rob a church. I've always felt like that's not a very good reason, and that probably the tactical gear was to gain some sort of advantage, either as just purely a disguise or possibly to intimidate Missy. This person's saying maybe it was the physical advantage of wearing like body armor. Eh, Miles, I kind of am more along your lines with that. I think it seems a little clunky and difficult. Like if I'm going to fight somebody, I probably don't want to be dressed like that. That's more of like a crowd control riot police situation where you're like getting, tear gas thrown back at you.
Well,
Like
and it seems ill-fitting. It
yeah.
wasn't. You look at like people who like professional fighters. They're not, they're sort of like dressed for speed and agility,
Well, those
and
guys are usually removing clothes to get in the ring, right?
there's
Like,
that,
yeah.
and that's you do want to sort of remove certain stuff. Like if you think someone's going to be able to like actually fight back and get an advantage on you, you don't want to have like a shirt that they can pull over your head and like or you want to take your jewelry off and stuff like that. So sort of strapping on all this stuff that doesn't really look like it fits. From my analysis of the video, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to know more about your thinking here, Joshua. Honestly, drop a comment on the comment drop a comment on the comment react, because I'd like to understand a little bit more. Maybe I'm missing something, honestly, and I don't want to just dismiss this wholesale.
I mean, I can sort of see it. I get it. I'm just not sure I agree with it. Like I understand armor, exists for a reason. I get that. But if you're going for someone dressed in fitness clothing who's sort of a tiny woman, who's not expecting to have a fight that day, you probably don't need armor, but who knows?
Yeah, a tiny woman who is in fantastic shape.
Yeah, not
And
to say she
definitely
was,
strong.
defenseless, but yeah, I don't know. It still seems like overkill to me. All right, let's check out this next comment at Cindy159. Hello, Cindy. She says, it's kind of simple. She, meaning Missy, was advertising that she was going to be there and at what time, and some psycho simply waited for her. Obviously, she would get there early to set up. She probably didn't even know who it was, someone who just followed her online. That's a possibility. I mean, like, one of the things in the story is that Missy basically widely advertised, her fitness class. And it was no secret to the public that she was going to have it that morning at that church. And it's not a big leap for a person to think, well, she'll probably get there before the rest of the class because she has to set up. But now the question is there someone online who's obsessed with her to the point where they want to kill her for some reason? I don't think anything like that's ever come up, Miles, that we know of. I know she was getting some creepy messages on LinkedIn and stuff, like a lot of people do, a lot of women especially.
For sure.
But
I mean, that's my big question, Cindy, is motive, right? The why. I agree with you about the advertising. We touched on that a lot in our coverage of the case. The fact that she was always posting on Facebook, the fact that anyone who was following her knew where she was going to be. I agree with you. The logic of, she's going to get there early. She'll logically be there before her class starts, and there's going to be a window where she'll probably be alone. I agree with all of that. The question comes down to motive. So someone who just simply followed her online, would that be like an obsessive? or, is it someone who followed her online because they had axe to grind, which I think is where most people lean towards in this case. Um, but interesting comment, and thank you for that. Jeannie Louise 3162 says her father-in-law killed her, respectfully.
Thank you for being respectful about it.
Jeannie, I think Sean picked this comment just because you said respectfully, and oftentimes these comments are not always respectful. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, it was just a funny juxtaposition. It's like an accusation of murder,
Yeah,
respectful, you know.
my feeling about this my feeling about the father-in-law is this. The fact that the thing happened with the shirt and the blood
And the
and the
dogs.
dogs and his walk, I just feel like it can't be him because there's too much that happened to this guy. I mean, unless he's he's Doctor Doom, level, and he's playing this 4D chess where he's like, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one dog attack the other and kill it, and I'm going to get the shirt bloody, and then I'm going to bring that in, and then they're going to call the cops on me, and that's going to make everyone think it's me, but then they're going to clear me, and then I'm going to walk away, and ha ha ha.
Yeah.
I don't know, because that's a hell of a thing that happened to him. But anything's possible. Anything's possible.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is he was like, basically cleared because he was proven not to be in town at the time. Forgive me, guys, if I'm wrong. It's, I'm reaching back a couple months to that case now, but my remembrance of it is it was pretty quickly clear that he just wasn't there for it. But I love comments like this because you're not the only one to think it. I mean, the gait, the size of the person, it all kind of adds up. The fact that if it's not the spouse, maybe somebody trying to help the spouse did it. Like, I get it, I get it. And maybe one day we'll find out that it was the father-in-law, respectfully. But for now, it just doesn't seem like there's any real evidence. Let me take this next one, which is also kind of an interesting comment. David Taylor says in all caps, no one ever talks about life insurance. What amount? With a period and not a question mark. Like, he really means business here. And then in response to that, Dulce Noche, who I think we've read comments from before, says, because there was none. So yeah, again, this is just one of the puzzling things about this story. It's like, what's the motive here? If it was the father-in-law doing it for the husband, or if it was the husband, maybe there was life insurance involved. No, there wasn't. Your all caps demand for more info on it makes a lot of sense. Why isn't anybody talking about it? In this case, I think it's just because it's not in play.
Okay, so we're going to move on to a deep cut, which is Jennifer Kesse, but it's actually a comment on the update that we did with Drew Kesse a few months ago when the new information came out that there was new DNA evidence and that the police were actually going back and running some new tests. So Tina Martina, 1801, says, who are the 3 to 6 people? That's a great question. That is a great question. I don't think we know that. I think that's part of what's going on with this testing. Obviously,
he's referencing the possible suspects, like the handful.
Yeah, I think I think we could speculate on who those people are. I would imagine that some of our viewers who are really familiar with the Jennifer Kesse case could probably name a few people by name. Some being maybe an ex-boyfriend, maybe a gentleman who worked at the building, maybe another gentleman who was doing construction at the building, possibly several of those gentlemen. I think we all know who's kind of in play, the most obvious people on the Jennifer case. I don't know their names off the top of my head. I don't know if I would name them right now anyway, but Tina, there are specific people that have been looked at, and I would actually recommend going back and watching the suspects and theory video that Sean and I did about the Jennifer Kesse case, and we could drop that link in the description of this in this video, so it's available, because it is worth a watch, and we do go through the major suspects that we know of that were being looked at in this case that are probably still in play and whose DNA is being tested against that new evidence.
Yeah, that was a really interesting video to make. I think you guys should check it out if you haven't seen it yet. It's from a couple months back now, but definitely I had a good time looking at all those people and trying to figure it out myself, trying to figure out if any of them were involved. So hopefully we'll find out one day, Miles, not just the 36, but hopefully we'll find the one.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move to the Chance Engelbert case, another one that pops up again and again. You know, this is the first thing that we ever covered on this channel, and we continue to get comments and people thinking about it. So, Little Carla 94 says, I'm in England and have followed this case for years. There's no way this was an accident. Everything points to foul play, in my opinion, and I hope one day a new officer takes on the case. Yeah, I mean, from your lips to God's ears, Little Carla, I think Miles and I are both of the opinion that if not foul play, then certainly we don't have enough answers to know what happened yet. And it seems like the people charged with investigating Chance's case, it was a disappearance. Now they've found his remains, and it's just sort of like, all right, we're done here. But knowing what we know about what happened the last time Chance was alive and the ensuing years where he was missing, it just doesn't seem like we have all the answers yet. So yeah, I think we both feel the same way.
Yeah, and I would just say that hopefully a new agency takes on the case, or hopefully the agency involved gets a new leadership and decides to look at the case in a different way. Because I don't know that, like, the way things are set up right now, that it's just going on to someone new. It just seems like they don't have any interest in looking any further into it.
Yeah, it seems almost like systemic in the agency that's charged with it. And again, one of the things we've heard from a lot of the locals who have weighed in on our channel about this is that there's a huge distrust of the various investigative agencies and even the state itself, you know, the state attorney's office and everything. Every time we've touched Nebraska, we have gotten nothing but comments telling us we don't trust the police, we don't trust the prosecutors, we don't trust the county, whatever. I don't know that there's really anything to it. All Miles and I can say from our vantage point, not living in that state, is, boy, we sure hear a lot about it, you know, so it's hard not to kind of see a lot of smoke and wonder if maybe there really is a fire somewhere there over the hillside.
Absolutely. At user DJ8GT6IK7C
Wow.
says,
Like one of Elon Musk's kids' names.
you guys should do Idaho 4. So I actually looked this up because I did see this comment when it went up, and because whenever we get a suggestion to cover a case, obviously Sean and I both get really interested. This case was actually solved, from what I could see. So unless I'm missing something and there's some questions about it, you know, it's not really in our wheelhouse. But we do appreciate the suggestion, user. You know, please feel free to, you know, if you have any other ideas of cases that you would like to see us cover, absolutely hit us up. But we're really sticking to the unsolved ones right now, and the missing people who have not been found.
Yeah, there's a myriad of cases out there in the world that would be interesting to talk about and be kind of like fun to make videos on. But really, the purpose of this channel is unsolved and trying to platform people who want answers on their case. So yeah, the Idaho 4, otherwise known as the Moscow, Idaho murders, is a really wild story. It's extremely sad. It's very upsetting, but they did make an arrest. And actually, I'm not sure if that trial has happened yet or not. I don't really keep up on that case, but I know that they got the guy that they think did it. So if for some reason there's a hung jury and they continue the investigation, maybe at that point we'll dive into it. But until then, I think we're going to leave it to the news to cover that one.
Agreed. So guys, this is going up on Monday. If you're watching everything that we do, you just saw the case breakdown for Liam Toman, right?
Mm-hmm.
So guys, this is going up on Monday. Last Friday, we put up the case breakdown for Liam Toman. So this Friday, we're going to be putting up a long form interview with Liam's mother, Kathleen. And then the following week, we're going to be posting an interview with Liam's dad, Chris, and his stepmom. So keep an eye out for that. Both of those interviews were extremely compelling. both from sort of just like a personal interest point of view, and also just more information. And I think it's also interesting because as much as they're both super invested in it, Kathleen and Chris do seem to have different POVs on what may or may not have happened, and on the investigation itself. So definitely worth checking out. And obviously next week, I would imagine our comment react will be mostly about Liam, because we are starting to get a lot of feedback about that case breakdown.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, we're excited to hear what you guys think about that story. It's a very recent one too. I think it's a great example of one that could actually really use the help, right? Because this is only a year and change at this point since Liam disappeared. So, as usual, guys, don't forget we're a podcast. You can find us everywhere you get podcasts, and we are also a YouTube membership program now. So if you like the mission that we have, which is not just to read YouTube comments, but more usually it's to cover these stories and to bring people in who want a platform and want your attention on their case. If you like that mission, you believe in what we're doing, consider joining the membership. It's only $4.99 a month, and it goes a long way towards helping Miles and I do this work. We sincerely appreciate it. And other than that, Miles, anything else before we back out today?
No, just keep sending in those suggestions, guys. Keep helping us boost these stories in the algorithm. We're going to keep doing what we're doing.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.